Matilda Joslyn Gage played a critical role in the women's suffrage movement, yet she is not talked about today. This project will explore why she has been widely forgotten due to her critiques of the church, even though her contributions to the women's suffrage movement still affect people today. Gage fought for women's suffrage right alongside Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who both have their respective places in history books, but one name that has failed to be recognized is Matilda Joslyn Gage. Not only did Matilda Joslyn Gage play a role in the fight for women's suffrage, but also the rights of Native Americans and the freedom of the slaves. The scrubbing of her role in these movements can be credited to the critiques she expressed against the church.
Most people haven't heard of Gage. Even the people in central New York, when they find out about this museum, they're surprised and pleasantly surprised that we have such an incredible historical figure, but she was forgotten. In fact, she was erased. In part, that is because she didn't support the merger of the NWSA and the AWSA. And with that merger, the trajectory of the women's movement shifts. And Gage, essentially, the organization she helped found no longer reflects her values. Gage believed strongly in the separation of church and state.
The women's suffrage movement began in 1848 at the Seneca Falls Convention, which was organized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott. The suffrage movement stemmed from the belief of women in America that not only do women deserve the right to vote, but also that all adults in the United States deserve this right. This belief is carried on even after the 15th Amendment is passed and black men were granted the right to vote, because suffragettes split their movement in two. One side, the NWSA, which was the side that Gage fought with, believed that it needed to be made known that this step was not good for women. This is because it even further drilled in the belief that the government did not see it as their responsibility, and the fight was put solely on women who had already been fighting. And the other side, the AWSA, believed this was a step in the right direction. To them, this meant it was only a matter of time until women's suffrage carried suit. Not to mention that multiple men aided in the effort of helping Matilda Joslyn Gage and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. This is substantial, seeing as during this time men had most of the power.
As the women's suffrage movement kept progressing, Matilda Joslyn Gage joined soon after the Seneca Falls Convention, as she had been busy prior due to the birth of one of her children. Matilda Joslyn Gage worked alongside many other suffragettes much more well known than her in the fight for women's suffrage. One of the most notable works left from the women's suffrage movement is the Women's Bible, which she co-authored with Elizabeth Cady Stanton. This book worked to outline the impurities of the church and their bias towards women by not helping in their fight. Gage was a key figure in the writing of this book, as well as many others. Gage was also present at many of the conventions that built the foundation for the movement. In the fight for a woman's right to vote, Matilda Joslyn Gage spoke at conventions such as the Women's National Liberal Union Convention for Organization on February 24th to 25th, 1890. Matilda Joslyn Gage worked hard in the fight for women's suffrage, and when she realized that the government wouldn't be much help, her and other suffragettes took on this responsibility themselves. Through Matilda's time in the suffragist movement, she wrote many books, each of which filled with her ideas and beliefs. One of the most notable pieces of literature she wrote completely on her own is Women, Church, and State. She discusses her viewpoint in not only the fight for the women's right to vote, but also taxation and parental rights, as well as Native American rights. This book highlights many of her ideas, but the one that was most controversial to many other suffragettes was the section, The Church of Today. In this section, she discusses the same belief as mentioned in the Women's Bible, that in order to truly accept women into the church, that the Bible needs to be rewritten as it was outdated and exclusionary to women. The Bible made women believe that they were created for the sole reason of being for men, while many suffragists didn't see anything wrong in this belief, as they were devout Christians and wouldn't speak against the church. Gage was different. When she saw something that didn't align with her values, she would fight to get them changed, which is what scared many other suffragists, leading them to kicking her out of the movement. As the suffragist movement continued to move forward, it started to move in the direction that instead of fighting for their rights, they were just simply asking for them. This is something that Gage could not agree with. Gage believed that there should be no need to ask for permission to vote, as it was a basic human right that should not be asked for but protected. Her ideas still had an impact even after being removed from the fight due to her work that spoke against the church. Her fights and contributions to the suffragist movement helped build the groundwork for which women's rights have continued to progress even today. All of her beliefs still held up the suffragist movement even after she was no longer part of it. Her speech titled The Dangers of the Hour was made at the Seneca Falls Convention on February 24th, 1890. This speech is one of her most influential. Gage brings up the fact that during the fights against slavery in the United States, the church was called out as a factor in holding the movement back, and that it was no different for women, that it was the church that was holding them back, and that until people were ready to fight against the church, that there could be no real changes made. This idea stuck around in the heads of suffragists even after Gage was no longer fighting alongside them, and with this idea, they were able to make the necessary changes for their movement to reach one of its goals, women's suffrage.
Gage had many impacts throughout the United States during her lifetime, whether it be during her time helping her father run a house connected to the Underground Railroad as a child, or be it during her fight for the rights of women and Native Americans. All of her works had long-lasting impacts on the world. Gage even kept scrapbooks during the Civil War, each of which could be considered primary sources that can help historians to understand individual events better, expanding her changes to the world even more. Not only has Gage had an impact on women's rights, but she's even influenced one of the largest pieces of mainstream pop culture that exists today. Matilda, Joslyn Gage's daughter, Maud, married a man named L. Frank Baum, the author of the book The Wizard of Oz. The book, as well as the movie adaptations, are riddled with political innuendos and ideas, all of which he got from his mother-in-law. The Wizard of Oz is known by many people through all generations due to the movies made inspired by it. In The Wizard of Oz, the story follows a little girl from Kansas who ends up in a magic world where she's told by the good witch Glinda to follow the path to the wizard and to avoid the wicked witch. This story closely resembles Gage and the suffragist beliefs after Gage is no longer part of the movement. Allegorically, Glinda represents the suffragists telling the people what to believe, like Glinda does with Dorothy. The Wicked Witch represents Gage, who is kicked out by her fellow suffragettes due to her not supporting the church, which is represented by the wizard. A modern-day adaptation of this book, known as Wicked, tells the story even clearer. Instead of following Dorothy, it follows Elphaba and Glinda in their early life, who start out as friends and later go their separate ways due to them disagreeing about the wizard. Elphaba is a direct representation of Gage. Elphaba is shown to be empathetic, always trying to fight for her beliefs and the rights of animals in Oz. When she attempts to span her beliefs to the wizard, who could really change the way animals were being treated, she discovers he is the one treating them like this, much like how the church was holding back women's rights when they could so easily help them. Glinda, who represents the other suffragettes, wants to keep believing in the wizard and betrays her friends, leaving her to go off on her own, making Elphaba the now-known Wicked Witch. This means that many people have been introduced to Gage's ideas without even knowing it. Gage was an activist before she was anything else. Even while focused on raising her children, her ambition to improve the lives of those around her remained the same. This is evident in her final will, as she made sure to leave her most influential works from her time as a suffragette to the public. Gage aided in the fight to free the slaves, to end the racism and mistreatment of the Native Americans, the right for women to vote, and to seize the church from continuing their corrupt teachings that were only holding society back. However, her voice against the church led to her being forgotten, and she has not been credited for her inspiring impact for not only women, but every single person in the United States. Gage should be recognized for leaving her footprint in the protection of women's rights alongside her fellow suffragettes, as she took responsibility on, by herself, to fight against the church before anyone else was prepared to. In one final stand on her beliefs, Gage left a quote on her memorial stone. "There is a word sweeter than mother, home, or heaven. That word is liberty."